Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So we have male athletes who continue to dominate women's sports, who continue to gain accolades and gold medals, records that they were previously unable to achieve while competing against other male athletes. But in the women's category, they're thriving, apparently. The last week at the Liberty League Championship, we had a male athlete, Camden Schreider, competing in the women's competition and won the 400 meters, the 200 meters. And this person obtained 2 school records with a time of 55:07 in the 400 meters. So in the women's category, those are 2 school records. But in the men's category, this person would have come last with those times. But according to the changes that the Biden administration are making to Title IX that come into effect the 1st of August, a male athlete is perfectly within his rights to compete in the women's category, as long as he identifies as a woman, which means that anybody can be given those same rights, and those same protections that were previously given to women can now be used against women. If they don't accept male athletes or men who identify as women, it has essentially perverted the purpose of Title IX to protect the very people who are infringing upon women's sports and women's spaces, to put their desires above the needs and rights of women. Many women recall a time where they fought for Title IX to exist in the first place, in order to ensure that everybody gets the same opportunities regardless of sex. But now, biological sex doesn't matter. As long as you feel like a woman, as long as you say you're a woman, apparently that's all that's needed. Apparently that's more important than biology these days. And we're supposed to pretend that a male athlete all of a sudden turns into a female just because of identity. We're supposed to pretend that it makes that person the same as the female athletes. We're supposed to pretend that we don't see advantages. We're supposed to ignore that the person is essentially a mediocre athlete when competing against males, or even less than mediocre for many of them. But now, once in the women's category, they're able to use their male body to dominate, to be faster, to be stronger, simply because of how they were born, simply because of their biology. And all the hard work that the women put into becoming better athletes, all the hard work and training that they do on a daily basis will never be good enough, simply because they're not the same. But none of that matters. The Biden administration wants you, as a woman, to get over it. Let people be their authentic selves, even though their authentic self is a mediocre athlete. You have to accept losing if you're a woman. You have to accept competing in an unfair competition. You have to accept having male athletes in your locker rooms, no longer having female-only spaces. You have to do all of that if you're a woman, or you're a bigot. Or the Biden administration will label you as the predator. The Biden administration will label you as the bully, as the aggressor.
With us today, we have Riley Gaines, a 12-time All-American swimmer with 5 SEC titles, and one of the bravest voices speaking out on this issue. If the weak men running the White House had half the courage of Riley, our country would be in a much better place.
So thankfully, we have some state governors who are not taking this lying down. They're basically saying, no, we will not comply. So we have Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who actually signed an executive order reinforcing acts that Arkansas has put in place to protect women's sports and to protect women's spaces. And she's straight up saying, we're not complying with this. We're not doing it here. Here, we recognize women's sports. Here, we value women having their own spaces. So Sarah Huckabee Sanders issued an executive order Thursday that she said was designed to protect female Arkansas athletes against what she called unfair competition. The order signed by Sanders reinstates the state's opposition to trans athletes in women's sports and comes in reaction to changes made to the US Department of Education's Title IX rule. Title IX is designed to prevent discrimination in sports and is often used to support equity in women's athletics alongside men's sports, and is often used to support equity in women's athletics alongside men's sports. The changes set to go into effect August 1 would create protections based on gender identity and expand the definition of sexual assaults in K-12 schools and colleges.
Frankly, I'm appalled at what is coming out of Washington. I've said before that the dividing line in this country is no longer between right and left. It's between normal and crazy. And the most recent attack on common sense came from President Biden's Department of Education and their total rewrite of Title IX. When Title IX was first written, it was 37 words long. The message was simple. Men and women deserve equal access to higher education. In the 52 years since, there have been several beneficial additions, guaranteeing equal access to college athletics, establishing due process for harassment cases, and so on. However, last month, President Biden released a reinterpretation of Title IX that comes in at an insane 459,000 words. Let that sink in. It's a document that should scare every woman and frankly every man in America. Title IX was created to protect women, but Biden's Title IX attempts to erase women completely. According to the rule, sex is no longer based on the commonly understood biological differences between men and women. It's based on how a person feels or their gender identity. To put it another way, Biden thinks anybody can be a woman just because they say so. As a woman, the mother of a daughter, and our state's first chief executive to give birth, thankfully not while in office, I can't think of anything more offensive or dismissive of the very real, very scientific traits that all women share and that no man does. I find myself asking, where are all the so-called feminists? Women fought for so long to have equal access to sports and higher education. Are we really going to throw that all away in the name of political correctness? Walk down any street in Arkansas, from Little Rock to Mountain Home, and ask someone the difference between a man and a woman. You will probably get a pretty straightforward answer. But apparently, our leaders in Washington can't tell the difference anymore. It would be laughable if it weren't so threatening. That's because the rule doesn't change just language on a paper. It could have a very real impact on Arkansas colleges and universities. If Biden gets his way, female college students will shower and change next to male college students. Referring to someone using biologically correct pronouns will get you hauled in front of a disciplinary board for harassment. And scholarships, previously reserved for women, will now be open to anyone claiming to be a woman. My message to Joe Biden and the federal government is that we will not comply.
The executive order reinforces Arkansas's laws, including the Fairness in Women's Sports Act and the Given Name Act, that discouraged gender identity changes past those assigned at birth. So Sanders was joined on stage by the Secretary of Education, Jacob Oliver, and by Riley Gaines, who she commended greatly. And Riley shared her story and said that the Title IX changes are Orwellian and basically an attempt to replace women.
In addition to being forced to give up our awards and our titles and our podium spots and our opportunities, we were also forced to share a locker room with Thomas. Again, a 6'4", 22-year-old man, fully intact and fully exposing himself, inches away from where we were simultaneously fully undressed. And let me be very clear here. We were not forewarned of this arrangement. We did not give our consent, and no one asked for our consent. Not so long ago, a decision by a university to allow such discriminatory behavior would have been understood as an obvious violation of Title IX, the federal civil rights law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex in education, including college athletics. But now the Biden administration is attempting to rewrite Title IX, flipping the statute entirely on its head. Rather than protect female students, the Biden administration recently released an administrative rule that allows the discriminatory conduct female swimmers faced in 2022. Actually, it not only allows this discrimination, it compels it, it endorses it. More specifically, the new rule forces schools to let males replace women, to take our opportunities and our scholarships, and enter our private spaces, including locker rooms and bathrooms. It encourages schools to gaslight and emotionally blackmail women who do not consent to these violations, and to compel speech and punish students who express certain political viewpoints. Under this unconstitutional rule, a child's refusal to use preferred pronouns is grounds for sexual harassment. How Orwellian is that?
And the Nebraska Governor Jim Pillen said that he was going to do the same thing, that Nebraska was not going to comply. And apparently a handful of states are saying the same thing. So he said, the rewrite of Title IX is an affront to the common sense idea that men do not belong in women-only spaces. He said it was a direct attack on the Women's Bill of Rights that he established by executive order last August. Under the order, state agencies, boards, and commissions must define someone's sex as male or female at birth. And then he said, Nebraska must fight against radical gender ideology and vigorously protect the rights of Nebraska women and girls. Protecting our kids and women's athletics is my duty. The president's new rules threaten the safety of women and their right to participate in women's sports. Nebraska will not comply. So at least 15 states are saying that they're not going to comply, and various boards of education in certain states are urging their governors to defy this new change to Title IX. So at least 15 states are suing over the final Title IX rule, but not Nebraska. Governors and state education chiefs in at least 6 states, Arkansas, Florida, Louisiana, Montana, South Carolina, and Oklahoma, have also directed districts to defy the rule. So we have Texas, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina have filed 2 separate but similar lawsuits against the Biden administration's Title IX rule last Monday. One lawsuit, filed by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, says the U.S. Department of Education has attempted to effect radical social change in our nation's schools by interpreting Title IX to include protections for LGBTQ+ students. The second lawsuit, filed by Alabama, Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina, along with several conservative civil rights organizations, was filed on behalf of college athletes and parents who also take issue with the rule inclusion of LGBTQ+ students. The issue is ensuring that biological sex no longer counts, because these are protections afforded to people based on biological sex, or at least to say that you should not be discriminated against because of your sex. But now, those protections are going to extend to people who simply identify as whatever sex they want to. And that is going to infringe upon women, as we've seen. That is going to infringe upon men too, who want their own spaces. And of course, anybody who doesn't go along with gender ideology, who states biological fact, could find themselves in trouble, including teachers and students who don't agree with this. And of course, we have the dissenters, such as Arkansas ACLU. Spokesperson Megan Bailey described the new executive order as part of Saunders' endless attack on LGBTQ people in our state, and added that it stands in stark defiance of laws protecting against discrimination. But what we're seeing here are certain groups getting preferential treatment, are certain groups having their wants and desires appeased at the expense of women, at the expense of people who want their own spaces that are based on biological sex, at the expense of people who want their own sports that are based on biological sex, not identity. We can't infringe upon the rights of one group by claiming that we're supporting the rights of another. Nobody should be discriminated against because of their sexuality, because of being LGBTQ, anything like that. What we're saying is leave women's sports alone. Women's sports are for females. Categories exist for a reason. Women should have their own spaces for safety. The same reason why they should have their own sports and own categories. Title IX was introduced to afford protections based on biological sex. So rewriting Title IX to include identity completely destroys its original purpose. And the Independent Council on Women's Sports Icons, they wrote to the United Nations saying that this is an affront to women and this essentially constitutes violence towards women. The brief requested that male participation in female sports be treated as an act of violence against women. The letter was first obtained by the Washington Examiner. Title IX was a federal law written to protect women, and the Biden administration has now turned it into a law that protects men at the expense of women. Icons co-founders Marcy Smith and Kim Jones told the Washington Examiner, with the stroke of a pen, Biden has reversed congressional intention and turned Title IX into a blatant call to subjugate women and girls. Absolutely. So we know that West Virginia have filed a lawsuit and Tennessee have filed a lawsuit. And the Tennessee Attorney General, Jonathan Scimetti, said in a statement, the US Department of Education has no authority to let boys into girls' locker rooms. In the decades since its adoption, Title IX has universally been understood to protect the privacy and safety of women in private spaces like locker rooms and bathrooms. Asalam, she was one of the recipients of the letter from Icons, and she has spoken out about disagreeing with their redefining the word sex when it comes to male and female, basically allowing identity to come before biological sex. She has actually objected to that, and she is the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls. And she previously wrote, the erroneous redefinition of sex through these implementing regulations constitutes a grave setback that will increase the vulnerability of the majority of women and girls to incursions into their privacy, including voyeurism, sexual harassment, and physical and sexual attacks, by effectively removing single-sex spaces. This was in a press release last month. And that's what Icons is referring to. Of course, certain activists are going to say, this is ridiculous, talking about violence against women. Some of them are even going to say, are you implying, that trans kids are dangerous? They love to put that one out there as well when you express concern for the safety of women. When the reality is, women are more vulnerable. Women represent the majority of people affected by SA. So single-sex spaces are even more important for women in particular. Everybody benefits from single-sex spaces, but it is of particular importance for women. So this isn't an exaggeration by Icons. So do you think these states are going to get away with not complying? The risk they take is losing federal funding.
In a moment, I'll sign an executive order reiterating our laws and instructing our educational institutions and the Arkansas Department of Education to follow them. And if President Biden threatens our state with loss of educational funding because we refuse to go along with his election year pandering, Arkansas will take the federal government to court. That's because this issue goes far beyond a single locker room or a missed scholarship. The truth is important. Biology is important.
So it's a huge risk, and obviously losing your federal funding can have catastrophic consequences for everybody involved. But I'd much rather live in a state that isn't going to comply. I'd much rather live in a state like that than one where women aren't even recognised, when women are reduced to simply an identity, a feeling, when women don't even have their own sports. So let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. Take care of yourselves, and God willing, I will see you in the next video.